God is one, and people have always lived by this truth, and this is clearly reflected in ancientry. This universal knowledge was passed from person to person, from spirit to spirit. It mostly wasn't even written down, and only myths, legends, and tall stories remained. And the participants of the project, the Universal Grain, decided to investigate this topic more deeply to find out the way ancient people lived with this spiritual knowledge, passed it on, and how it was reflected in their culture.
Now, I am reading the last pages of Allat, and on page 742, it is said that understanding one's own dual nature helped one make an informed choice to which of the natures, the spiritual or the animal one, to devote his transient life and which will to serve. By the way, the basis of the primordial knowledge about the collective and individual minds later gave rise to archaic beliefs. Each nation also had a rich mythology of the origin of a human being and the world, which was originally based on the single grain of the primordial knowledge that was common to all people. The guys shared that there is such work from German scientist Wilhelm Schmidt, who analyzed scientifically culture and traditions of the people who still live by their old principles. I went to Humboldt Public Library, and in one of the descriptions of North Californian Indians and Fuegians, I found that they had that higher being that embodied the best qualities, of which people strived for. It's interesting that Schmidt made it very clear that it was precisely alive, meaning it was real, like a part of everyday life, that is, it was fully integrated into it. Wilhelm Schmidt studied faiths and culture of Aboriginal peoples who didn't have a written language. The scientist used the term primitive monotheism in his work, giving evidence that people who didn't have written language had a concept of the one higher being, the creator of all. Wilhelm Schmidt believed that various forms of totemism, shamanism, various magic cults appeared at the late stages of culture development as a result of spiritual degradation of society and due to the loss of the primordial knowledge. Because at the root of people's faith, there were concepts of the one higher being, different from all the earthly and material. Among the names of this being, one can encounter, such as the Father of Heaven, the Maker, the Creator, the Omnipresent, the All-Knowing, and so on. It's interesting that according to the scientist, this being had no specific image or form. It embodied virtue, righteousness, and all the best qualities which man aspired to possess.
When we turn to the scientific knowledge, whether it is Russian scientific school or Western scientific school, it is the same in the fact that any nation has the one creator. On any continent, every nation has its own faith and understanding of the Supreme God. And when they started to study it, let us say impartially, well, for example, let's immerse ourselves into some African tribe and see what they know. And it turns out that they know practically the same that Europeans know. Even more, it may just seem to us, because we have lost a lot.
How do the African nations perceive the unity, the oneness of God?
When I was in Dogon country, the indigenous African religion, where God is oneness, like we all come from a creator. God is everywhere versus
inside.
And that's another one too, inside as well. It's just the connection, everything's inside. God is everywhere, but God is inside you as well. Again, since we come from the source, the source is inside us as well. So that's what I observed and experienced when I went to Africa.
Yeah.
I lived in Nicaragua for 3 months. I took part in a social project. What have I learned? I've personally learned much more from the people who live there, and this is indeed a great experience. What is certainly clear is that spirituality has necessarily always been a part of every human culture, and I strongly believe in that. Self-reflection is inherent to people. This is exactly responsibility to themselves and their conscience. And at the same time, we have a wonderful gift to feel ourselves as a part of some greater whole.
The ancients obviously had access to that type of spiritual knowledge. So they were more spiritual than us. They were not more like religion believers. They were more spiritual because they had access to spiritual senses. Then we would differently see the world around us and the universe.
I think that it is very important for a person to understand from the very early age that there is some higher force. It doesn't matter how we call it. I think it is secondary how it's called. But it is the main part of what it means to be a human.
What about the myths and epics in ancient cultures? Or was it like a example what you have to apply to your life?
Yeah, we now call it mythology because it has, in our Western society, it has a different point and meaning in society. But in ancient societies, their mythology, so to speak, it was very real and it was part of their society. And it was indeed a code of moral value.
Mm-hmm. Like a guide.
Yes, the mythology was an example how to live by. That is true. And there are also big morality stories.
Legends and myths come out of the experiences of people, understanding of what is good and what I like to call less good. And when we look at stories and legends and myths that are passed on from generation to generation, it's basically to guide us as a society about good living and what is not so good living.
The deepest feeling of belonging to the origin and perception of it as an attribute existed in all ancient cultures as a matter of fact. As it should be, they didn't make it any teaching, religion. This was reality in which they lived. When a person understands certain regularities of spiritual development, he recognizes them in any culture, no matter how different they may be called.